Well, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Mahesh Ramanadham with the United States Food and Drug Administration, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. I'm currently the Deputy Director of the Office of Policy for Pharmaceutical Quality within the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. And I'm very happy to talk to you today about our implementation of ICH Q12, Technical and Regulatory Considerations for Pharmaceutical Product Lifecycle Management, our experiences, the policy underpinning it, as well as some of the success stories that we've had along the way of this transformational guideline that really enables agility in the post-approval space. Before I begin the substantive content of the presentation, just wanted to make a statement about what we believe in CDER Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, and that everyone deserves confidence in their next dose of medicine. And to us, quality is what assures the availability, the safety, and the efficacy of every single dose. Let's go ahead into the actual content of the presentation here today. As a reminder, hopefully you all have read ICH Q12. It has been out for 4 years now, and our implementation guidance has been out for 2 years. Hopefully you are all familiar with that, and if you're not, I highly encourage you to read those two documents as they really paint a broad picture of how to use ICH Q12, its goals, what it intends to achieve, and best ways to approach the tools. But for those that have not read it, ICH Q12, as we call it, Technical and Regulatory Considerations for Pharmaceutical Product Lifecycle Management, really utilizes all the best tools in Q8 through Q11 to provide a framework to facilitate the management of post-approval CMC changes in a more predictable and efficient manner. And really, the take-home here is as applicants better utilize the tools that we have in ICH Q8 through Q11, it provides the opportunity to present scientific justifications to reduce the volume of elements that would be CMC changes that require a filing to the agency, and offer the opportunity to reduce the reporting categories that go along with it. So overall, less things that need to be reported to the agency at a lower level if the tools are used correctly. And really that's summarized in that third bullet there, that when the Q8 through Q11 tools in the Q12 manner is used in a stronger fashion, opportunity for fewer established conditions. When it's weaker or less robust, is likely going to be more established conditions for the applicant. Important note here is that the use of ICH Q12 is voluntary. Implementation is also flexible in the sense that the proposals for specified established conditions on a product lifecycle management document can happen at any point in the life cycle. It can happen with the original application, or it can come in as a post-approval supplement to identify and define the established conditions for a particular application product. It's also flexible in the sense that it can be used for as little or as much of the CMC sections of the application as the applicant desires. For example, it can be defining these EVECs for one specific unit operation, if that is where the applicant chooses to invest their time and resources in deploying ICH Q12. It can be for everything in Module 3, from your drug substance and drug product, manufacturing processes, container closure systems, analytical methods, manufacturing facilities, etc. The flexibility spans that spectrum. So let's talk about the suite of documents that describe how FDA is going to be implementing ICH Q12. Supposedly starting with the parent guideline itself. So in 2021, we adopted ICH Q12 as a Step 5 document for FDA, formally making it an FDA guidance that's implemented inside of the US system. And at the same time, we replaced our 2015 draft guidance for established conditions, as that guidance was no longer necessary because Q12 took its place in describing the basic concepts and the overall framework for these tools working together for pharmaceutical product lifecycle management. At the same time, we in parallel published an implementation considerations guidance in 2021, which described how do you take those concepts that are in the parent Q12 guideline and utilize them in the FDA system, considering things like regional frameworks that we have, for example, drug master files and the interaction with applicants, and how you share information across both parties, ensuring that we're using the right terminology when it comes to the reporting categories,
under 31470, 21 CFR 31470 or 21 CFR 60112. So using the right terms when describing reporting categories, to where to locate or where to place the product lifecycle management document, and how to inform the agency that this particular application has established condition proposals and what kinds of proposals we're looking at. So really, how do you do it in the FDA system when interacting with our agency? And then happy to report, just as of October 17th, 2024, we've published our Manual of Policies and Procedures, which really describes the operations for the assessors in looking at the established condition proposals and reporting category proposals. And if you're able to take a look at that, it'll get you a very good insight into what the assessment teams across disciplines ought to be thinking about and looking at when they go through their assessment considerations, all the way from different elements like manufacturing process, analytical methods, through pharmaceutical quality system considerations and how that can impact proposals for flexible reporting categories, or rather reporting categories that are more flexible than regulation and guidance, all the way through how we might handle a situation where a manufacturing facility is no longer in compliance with GMP, and yet we have flexible reporting categories approved for established conditions. What does that mechanism or process look like for how we're going to react to that? So again, this Manual of Policy and Procedures is really focused on the internal operations for CDER, OPQ, and how it will conduct its business. But all three of these together paint the overall picture of how Q12 is designed, how it will be implemented, etc.
Okay, so the scope of ICH Q12 itself, this is a summary of the guideline, so I won't read it verbatim, but the real take-home message here is that when it comes to ICH Q12 and the FDA, we've had no limitations on the scope. We are fully implemented across anything that Q12 can be deployed to per the guidance. We are open doors for those approaches for applicants. All right, and similarly, we have a number of tools in ICH Q12. And the point of this slide is not to go through every single one in detail, but to really highlight that through these numerous tools that we have in ICH Q12, the applicant really should be looking at these as a suite. How to utilize all of these in conjunction or to the best of their ability to really open the door for maximum opportunities when it comes to justifying fewer established conditions and lower reporting categories. Again, the real take home here is that within FDA, we have fully implemented ICH Q12, so all of these tools are open for business. And again, coming back down to the applicant to decide how to best approach it and pursue maximum benefit. I'm not going to spend a time today going through every single one of these, but I did want to bring particular attention to established conditions, PACMPs, or as we call them in the United States, comparability protocols, how it all works together in the product lifecycle management document, and then the pharmaceutical quality system being that underpinning and that foundation of efficient implementation of Q12. So what are established conditions? If you haven't read the guidance documents, either the parent ICH Q12 or our implementation considerations guidance document, this is a very important time to pay attention and listen to what ECs are. So ECs are legally binding information within the application considered necessary to assure product quality. As a result, in the context of ICH Q12, as a result, any change to an established condition would require reporting to the regulator. Now, the big sort of take-home message here is to recognize that an application today is a mixture of established conditions and supportive information. And some of those established conditions examples that we all see in front of us, could be the actual drug substance, the drug product formulation, the manufacturing process and its controls, the specifications, the facilities, etc. Not uncommon, and hopefully is not news to anyone hearing this presentation, that when these elements are changed, there's an expectation for reporting to the application, whether it's a prior approval supplement or changes being affected, etc. Maintaining the file to account for what's currently going on in any one of these particular areas that are established conditions. But not everything in the application is an established condition. For example, the data supporting method validation, or the data supporting stability, or the data supporting process validation or process development approaches. Those things, when they are maintained, don't themselves necessitate a filing to the application to gain approval from the regulator for any sort of change. We would consider that more supportive information. So the concept of established conditions, which exists today in the regulatory frameworks, is really to highlight here that the application is a mixture of both. But when you change the established conditions element, that file will have to come to the regulator for either a notification or approval. A real important message, though, when it comes to Q12 implementation is that all changes, no matter whether they're reported to the application or not, require a change management approaches under the pharmaceutical quality system. Okay, so when it comes to Q12 implementation, I kind of mentioned this early on, but I'll come back to it again in the sense that the extent, i.e. the number and how narrowly defined of the established conditions, will vary depending on multiple factors. So how much product and process knowledge does the applicant have? What way do they gather it? How can they use that information to justify their proposals for established conditions? And their grasp and kind of mastery of demonstrating or showing the potential risk to product quality if that element were changed, given their product and process understanding, etc. Now, after identifying the established conditions, applicants can propose various ways of managing those established conditions, i.e. how they would report them to the application. A lot of flexibility here as well. Applicants can propose and choose to follow existing regulations and guidance. For example, here is a list of established conditions, but when changing them, I'm just going to follow, rather the applicant will just follow 21 CFR 31470 if you're a small molecule product, or 21 CFR 60112 for a large molecule product, and any implementing guidances on the types of reporting categories for specific changes, for example, the SUPAC guidances. Alternatively, an applicant has the opportunity to propose different reporting categories based on their knowledge of the product and process and their knowledge of risk when managing a particular change. For example, an applicant can say and propose in their submission that even though SUPAC would have this particular change reported as a prior approval supplement, the development knowledge that's been gained, the platform knowledge that's available, as well as the risk management assessment of this particular established condition and its link to quality attributes holds that we can change it, or rather it can be changed with a lower level of risk than what is normally expected or normally considered to be the level of risk. Hence, let's report this that a change is being affected, or even an annual report instead of a prior approval supplement. Those are opportunities that are available to the applicant depending on their desire to pursue those proposals. And I'm happy to report that we have seen quite a few of them and have approved quite a few of them, dependent on justification provided by the applicant. Okay. Now, this is a figure that we have from ICH Q12 itself, and I've always found it to be a fairly good picture how to work through the thinking of what I just talked about in the previous slide as far as identifying the established conditions and then the reporting category. And the way that I think about it is above the red line there, those questions and outcomes are geared towards is the thing an established condition. Below the red line is, well, for that thing, if it were changed, what would be the reporting category? And that top element there, this is a figure specific for manufacturing process parameters. It can be applied in its thinking across different elements of CMC. For example, the performance characteristics, or primary performance characteristics for a device constituent part. In our implementation guidance, we have an adaptation of this figure to combination products. It can be applied to analytical methods, and really focusing in on the characteristics or elements of that method that assure performance of that particular method. But here with process parameters, just to flesh it out even more, when we talk about parameters, looking at whether or not that parameter needs to be controlled to ensure product quality, and that can be thought of in a few ways. One, is it a critical process parameter, or is it a process parameter where the impact on quality cannot be reasonably excluded? There's not enough information yet, or there is some signal of a potential relationship however, more work needs to be done. And depending on the answer, yes or no, it could be determined an established condition or not an established condition. If the answer to those questions are no for this particular process parameter, it could be reasonably justified as not an established condition, in which case it's not reported to the application. Now, that's not to say it's not managed, and that all changes must be managed by the pharmaceutical quality system. It just provides the opportunity where that particular change doesn't require an annual report or a CBE or a PAS, and the waiting for approval from the regulator. On the other hand, if you are an established condition, it will be reported to the application if changed. And the second half of this diagram walks through how to apply Q9 type principles in considering the output of the criticality assessment and the control strategy to identifying the potential risk to product quality if that particular parameter was changed. Higher risks would trend towards prior approval. Moderate or lower risks would trend towards notification type changes, which in our FDA system would be your CBEs and your annual reports. Okay, now I previously talked about how the difference in development approach or product and process knowledge and understanding available or platform knowledge available could lead to differences in the established conditions. And what we have here is a screenshot from the ICHQ12 implementation working group training materials, which are available on ich.org. If you search down and scroll to ICHQ12, there will be a link to our training modules, and this is a screen grab from that particular one of those presentations. Excuse me. But what it shows here is that depending on the type of approach, whether knowledge is gained in a very superficial fashion under a minimal parameter-based approach, contrasted all the way to the right side of the screen, where there is a knowledge-rich environment of the interaction of parameters to quality attributes, such that you, and potentially even using technologies where there is online controls and ways of feeding back information from the process into the control of that particular unit operation. Consider that a performance-based approach where there's maximal knowledge and control of the process itself. And what you can see is that now these are not meant to be three distinct approaches as far as the only ways of doing things, but they are meant to illustrate a spectrum of minimal knowledge to maximal knowledge. And along the spectrum, if you look left to right, you will see that the things that are established conditions change, as well as the reporting categories associated with them change, to where on the left side you have more established conditions requiring filings to the application have changed. For example, look at your equipment type, your V-blender. It is an established condition, and if it were changed to a different type of equipment, it would be at least a CBE 30. Moving across the spectrum there, a situation where there is enhanced knowledge under a parameter-based approach, that risk might come down to a lower notification, notification low, potentially a CBE 0 or an annual report, to the other end of the extreme, under performance-based, where perhaps the applicant is able to justify that the type of equipment doesn't even matter anymore, and it can be controlled as far as the quality of material can be controlled independent of the type of equipment, to where the applicant has full flexibility to change that equipment without reporting it to the agency. So let's shift gears a little bit here from established conditions now into another tool that's available in ICHQ12, which we call the Post-Approval Change Management Protocol, or PACMP. In the US system, PACMP is the same as a comparability protocol. Please look at our current guidance on comparability protocols, and you'll find extreme congruence with the content that you see in ICHQ12. But for the purposes of the presentation, I might use PACMP and CP interchangeably. If I do, I'm talking about the same thing. So a PACMP, what it does is provide predictability and transparency in terms of the requirements and studies needed to implement a change. And if those requirements are met and studies are conducted as expected in that change management protocol, providing the opportunity for a lower reporting category when implementing the change. The beauty of a PACMP is that it can be utilized for one or more changes to a single product, or maybe you could use across products when that change is common and the characteristics of that change is common across products. For example, potentially a simple liquid formulation injectable product utilizing a container closure system, glass vial and stopper. Think about the opportunity to change the glass vial and stopper for multiple products at the same time using the same protocol. PACMP, much like established conditions, has extreme flexibility in when it can be proposed to the regulator, and that can be submitted with the original application or subsequently as a standalone supplement. Okay, so what could that look like with a PACMP? So with a change management protocol, step one will usually involve the submission of the written protocol in the form of a prior approval supplement to the regulator, and that will go over the tests, the studies, the acceptance criteria, etc., where the regulator can then look at the plan, look at the proposed outcomes of the plan, and provide feedback or concurrence in form of approval to that particular supplement back to the applicant. If approved, we now have that transparency built in on how to approach a particular change between the applicant and the regulator. Step two is then the applicant actually carrying out the tests and studies in the protocol, and if everything goes as expected, the results, the data generated meets the acceptance criteria, any other conditions specified in the approval of step one, that information will then be submitted to the regulator pursuant to the reporting category agreed upon, usually a lower reporting category than what would normally be expected, and can go forward with implementing that change. This can be done potentially at a notification type level, for example, a CBE or an annual report, giving more flexibility for streamlined and quicker change implementation. However, depending on the category, there may be situations where certain changes might need to come in at a prior approval supplement. For example, if the protocol acceptance criteria were not met, or if significant changes had to be made to the protocol, or if the risk of the change was agreed upon to be just too high to necessitate a notification or support a notification. Okay. So you might be asking yourself, what's the difference then between established conditions and a change management protocol? In reality, they are fairly well aligned and pretty close together. And they all share some common characteristics, which you can see on the first 3 rows there. A major difference is that with a change management protocol, you are getting the alignment up front on the approach, the studies, and acceptance criteria, and defining those up front to the regulator in the form of a submission of the protocol to the application. With the established conditions, it's a much wider open sort of approach in the sense that the applicant is justifying what would need to be reported and at what level based on the available either development knowledge or platform product and process knowledge at the time of that submission, and giving flexibility through that sort of mechanism. All in all, this all comes together in the product lifecycle management document, or the PLCM as it's called in ICH Q12. And the PLCM is a central repository of the established conditions, the reporting categories, details of the established conditions. For example, if it's a process parameter, the range of that process parameter, or the controls around it, specificity in the reporting categories. So not only one, will it follow US regulation and guidance, or is it something different that's proposed, for example, a lower reporting category, but also clarity on potential situations where the reporting category could be different. For example, if going beyond the lower end of a range is a lower risk, that might be a lower reporting category than going beyond the higher end of the range, that might be a higher risk and a higher reporting category. So directional based reporting categories having an opportunity in the PLCM as well. Now so all the ECs in the reporting category should be proposed and transparently captured on the PLCM. After approval, the applicant should be maintaining the PLCM with an updated list every time they make a change to an established condition. As well, from a pharmaceutical quality system management perspective, looking at opportunities to identify changes to ECs overall, those should be provided to the regulator too. So I mentioned early on about our draft guidance, ICH Q12 implementation considerations for FDA regulated products, and kind of what that does. I had already mentioned sort of how to use the ICH Q12 tools in our system and accounting for our frameworks. But the guidance does go into specific considerations that applicants should be aware of to be most effective in utilizing Q12 in the FDA system. So for example, clarity in the cover letter regarding proposed ECs to be as explicit as possible that this submission contains proposals for established conditions, and a PLCM in module 32R in the application, for example. Clear and specific identification of the ECs in the PLCM, the reporting category and justification. So, being as black and white as possible in the PLCM about what is the established condition, what is the reporting category, and not being vague about it, and clearly indicating the facilities in the PLCM, clearly indicating where those established conditions will be implemented. For example, if we're talking about established conditions for the drug product manufacturing process, to clearly concatenate any established conditions associated with the manufacturing process under the facility identifier for the drug product manufacturing operation. So we had briefly talked about kind of the PQS being the foundation of ICH Q12 implementation, in that while only some changes will be reported to an application, all changes are expected to be managed by the PQS. And kind of diving into further about why this is so foundational to Q12 implementation, in that the effectiveness of a PQS really provides confidence in the proposals for established conditions by allowing the regulator to see that there's a feasible and robust control strategy, that we have competent quality oversight for maintenance activities post-approval, that we are confident that all relevant data has been assessed and considered, anything that's been generated by a particular facility, and that the change management procedures are competent. We go on to talk about in ICH Q12 about how an effective change management process across the supply chain, across facilities that are linked up together in making a particular product is essential, because we really can't be thinking about the risk of changes within the silo of one particular element. It really needs to be broadened out and at least account for upstream or downstream impact. And I mentioned this on the previous slide about maintenance. Really, knowledge gained during the commercial phase is a key element of that post-approval confidence. That even after approval of a PLCM and the the established conditions, that as new knowledge is gained during manufacturing operations or changes in suppliers, routine stability, etc., that there is a periodic reassessment of criticality and risk and searching for any needed changes to established conditions, which goes both ways, in the sense that an applicant might learn something that gives them the opportunity to reduce the established conditions, to remove something that was previously thought of as a risk, but maybe is no longer with the additional knowledge gained. Alternatively, the opportunity to add established conditions for better life cycle control if new risks emerge in the context of routine operations, etc. This diagram here is from ICH Q12, and it really puts into a picture the relationship between the pharmaceutical quality system managing changes inside of a particular facility, or at the applicant level managing changes, and on the red part of that diagram, the linkage up to established conditions and notification. So you see that the change management life cycle is really agnostic to whether or not it needs to be filed to the application, and that all changes are being sort of managed under a consistent approach. And then in certain cases, the red dotted line over to the red box, in certain cases, some of those changes need to be reported to the application. What Q12 is doing is essentially making that red box smaller, or giving the opportunity for applicants to justify a smaller red box than what would be normally expected under regulation and guidance. But all of it kind of really depends on the effectiveness of the PQS, and knowing that this cycle, this approach, is going to be well implemented. Okay. So thinking about pharmaceutical quality systems, what would it mean for inspections? So if you are an investigator, or if you are if your facility being inspected, when it comes to Q12 implementation, there's no expectation for investigators to review established conditions. That will be done through the application with the assessors at headquarters. However, the inspection is an opportunity to gather information on the effectiveness of the pharmaceutical quality system. And for those that are paying attention, you will notice that we have updated our surveillance compliance programs and our pre-approval inspection compliance programs to add content about advanced pharmaceutical quality systems, about the change management effectiveness, etc., that in part supports ICH Q12 implementation. So as investigators looking at kind of these other areas of the quality system, particularly change management, it will help gain more evidence and more knowledge and more insight that can further drive flexibilities in Q12 proposals from applicants, or at least our assessment of them. But important to also know that if an inspection identifies a violative situation in the facility, it may impact the approval established conditions. It may also impact the viability of previously approved established conditions, to where changes might need to be reported at normal levels under regulation and guidance until such time as that facility is out of a state of violative compliance status. All right, so what have we done to get ourselves in a position to implement Q12? Long story short, we started 5 or 6 years ago on training FDA assessors and investigators on what ICH Q12 is, how to think about the change in thinking when it comes to letting science and risk drive some of the proposals for established conditions. That went all the way from theoretical examples to the output of the pilot assessments that we did in 2019, all the way through implementation of Q12 and the implementation considerations guidance. As I mentioned earlier, this also impacted the inspection compliance programs. This training and this exposure, was available or deployed to our assessors in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, our colleagues in the Office of Regulatory Affairs doing the inspections, as well as colleagues in the Office of New Drugs and Generic Drugs for awareness on what Q12 is and what it could mean to applications as they come in the door. In the day-to-day operations, now that we've opened the door and applications are coming in, we found the need to ensure continuity in the assessment in the early stages, especially as assessors are really starting to see submissions in real time. So we stood up 2 groups, the Established Conditions Coordinating Committee and the Q12 Assessment Implementation Team. The ECCC is really there to provide regulatory support to the assessment teams, helping them think through the policy, think through congruence with ICH Q12, and ensuring that any decisions or communications or language that we send back and forth to the applicant is supported by that policy. Whereas the Q12 Assessment Implementation Team, members there, represent our senior scientific folks across disciplines. We're there to help the teams really think about criticality assessments, risk assessments, and whether or not proposals for ECs are well justified. In addition to those 2 groups, a member from each one of those 2 groups joining the assessment team, we will also have a new discipline of pharmaceutical quality system assessor join the team to really look at those facilities where ECs are going to be implemented and whether or not there are any concerns with pharmaceutical quality system health, change management effectiveness, et cetera, that could influence decisions around established conditions and reporting categories.
So here you can see we have a snapshot of the applications that have come in both during FDA's established condition pilot in 2019 and after implementation of Q12 starting in 2021 through October of 2024. The breakdown of different application types, both pre and post approval, where we've had applicants submit to us proposals for established conditions with or without associated reporting category modifications. What you can see here is that there's a heavy skew towards the post-approval side of things. So an application product has already been approved, and the applicant is now taking the opportunity to define the established conditions or make proposals for the established conditions and alternate reporting categories after approval of the product, which is what we designed this program to be, in that it can be flexible. It can happen where the proposals for established conditions can happen at any point in the product life cycle. So either pre-approval with the original application to ensure that those flexibilities are available on the day of approval, or post-approval if the applicant's primary goal is to first get the product approved, get it on the market, and then determine where they want to see flexibilities for changes in the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. The program can accommodate all of that. So it can be an application with proposals in the original or proposals post-approval. So we can see we also have a heavy skew towards the innovator side of things. There's a lot more activity happening in the biologic license application space, followed on by the new drug application space. To date, we still not have seen any submissions come from the applicants of ANDA products, or abbreviated new drug applications, which I think is a great big opportunity here when we think about the advantages that are available to the users of Q12 when it comes to rapid and streamlined changes to CMC, oftentimes much quicker than what would be allowed under normal reporting categories and normal reporting expectations for established conditions. I will share that we've heard from applicants who've had success in this program that they see a significant percentage reduction in the things that are required to report for changes to the agency when utilizing Q12. One applicant reported a near 70 to 75% reduction in the reportable changes compared to their expected volume of reportable changes in the manufacturing process when they went through the effort to define the established conditions for that particular manufacturing process. So you can imagine all the things that applicants in the ANDA space are currently grappling with now, and what opportunity is on the horizon by defining the established conditions, both what should be and what should not be an established condition. The latter, therefore, being changes that can be managed solely under the pharmaceutical quality system. That there's a lot of flexibility to make these changes under the governance of the PQS with minimal to no reporting, waiting for approval from the agency. It's a huge potential for the ANDA market there. And I hope, if nothing else, audience members who are in that space, who are hearing this today, can realize that we've seen success from the FDA side of things on the BLA and the NDA side, and the door is open for those leaders on the ANDA side of things to come in and propose established conditions for their products. And just looking at kind of the things that we have seen a reduction in the volume of established conditions with either reporting categories that are consistent with the regulation and guidance. So really the applicant is taking the opportunity to reduce the total scope of reportable changes. Some applicants go a step further and say or propose a reduction in the reporting categories as well. So in addition to a reduction in the scope of reportable changes, utilizing their risk assessment to also demonstrate that the particular risk for this change is maybe better managed or lower than expected, such that instead of a higher reporting category, for example, a prior approval supplement, the applicant can make it with a CBE 30 or a CBE 0 even, and go forth with that change when needed without waiting for approval from FDA. And we've seen those proposals come through, and we've approved those proposals. We've seen established conditions proposals spread across different disciplines. So both manufacturing process, analytical methods. We're seeing it in the device constituents of drug device combination products. We've seen certain elements of facilities where there are established conditions proposed. So the opportunities are full when it comes to the areas where these proposals can be made. And we've seen applicants use the variety of options or the spectrum of options when it comes to the depth of justification necessary, the depth of assessment necessary, as well as the type of change proposed. So both parameter-based approaches, performance-based approaches, and we've seen that in the process and the methods. It's all coming forth in the applications that have been submitted to the FDA so far. Another great thing that we're seeing is applicants taking the opportunity to define established conditions based on the manufacturing facility. So for example, taking into account different capabilities, different equipment, different tolerances, etc., from one location to the other, and being clear in the PLCM what ranges and parameters or equipment or specifications, etc., would be established conditions for that site, thereby giving them the flexibility across the network. And as I mentioned, we're already seeing it now for device constituent parts as well, following that sort of rubric that you can see in the FDA implementations guidance. One of our appendices has a thought process approach for how to define or identify the established conditions for device constituent parts. So we're seeing a lot of success in this area. You'll notice that we have somewhere over 40 applications right now. 25 have been approved. A good chunk are under review right now. We had a handful where we've had applications withdrawn in that, when we asked for justification, the applicant was unable to provide the basis justification to support their established condition proposals and determined to withdraw their proposal rather than head towards a complete response action or protract out the action itself, which is an option here. If it's not quite ready, there's always an option to withdraw and come back when ready for that particular proposal.
So our reflections, the next couple of slides are going to go over things that we have seen, also kind of allude to common information requests that we're sending back to applicants to get clarity on particular proposals. But reflections from our initial experience, really what helps Q12 implementation, or at least the submissions for Q12, are clarity in the cover letter, so that the agency can start off immediately in assessing these applications with the right teams. I mentioned on a previous slide that we have 3 additional members of the team joining when an application includes proposals for ECs and alternate reporting categories, in order to get them on board at the right time. Seeing it up front in the cover letter is incredibly important. So whether that's proposing ECs or revisions to already approved ECs, or as simple as making changes in accordance with approved ECs, it's important to have that kind of clarity so that we can tailor the teams appropriately and maximize the time in assessing these applications. Scientific justification is a huge element when it comes to the success of Q12 applications and their approvability. Really, looking at these 3 sort of bullets here, the justifications really need to focus on explaining the approach to criticality assessment. Early on, we got an inkling that some applicants were worried that what was in Q12 would be calling them to change their company approach to risk assessment or criticality assessment to conform to what was there in Q12. And that's not the ask. The ask is a clarity in explaining how an applicant went about criticality assessment and risk assessment, so that the teams, when they're assessing these proposals for ECs and reporting categories, has the contextual understanding about why the applicant is proposing a certain level of criticality or a certain reporting category level, to then frame out whether the justification makes sense. So the ask is not to change, the ask is to explain so that the assessors know what they're looking at. Again, that's the second bullet there, right? That the justifications and risk assessments should clearly describe the scientific rationale for why something is considered an EC, or in some cases, why something that would normally be considered an established condition is not in this case. Same thing for the reporting categories. And one thing to highlight here, especially if an applicant is considering filing a PAS to document established conditions or gain approval for ECs for an already approved application, is to really ensure that the justifications for those ECs and reporting categories are current and are actually justifying the ECs and the reporting categories, and not just the parameters that were approved for the process. In more than one situation, we saw justifications that were pointing back to data or studies conducted for the original application approved 5 or 10 years ago, to where they even the thinking around established conditions didn't exist. The justifications didn't really make sense. So really think about when you are proposing ECs and reporting categories that are using the principles in Q12 and the implementation guidance to frame things in the right way to support justifications for why this particular element should be an established condition, why the reporting category should be at this level, etc. Okay, some more reflections. The PLCM really needs to include all the ECs for that relevant ECTT section. We found a few situations where, looking at Module 3 and looking at the justifications, what was identified by the applicant as critical for control, critical quality attributes, or the direct linkage there, did not show up on the PLCM, and there was no explanation of it. So we had to rectify that difference. As well, the PLCM should clearly state the reporting category when different than regional regulation and guidance, or be really clear that we're following regional regulation and guidance, and should do so in U.S. terms. There have been a few times where applicants have used the Q12 terminology, and we've had to go back and clarify, specifically what do you mean for a US filing? When you say notification moderate, does that mean CBE 30 or CBE 0? We need to be explicit so that the agency has confidence in what we're approving. In the same way, the PLCM, I mentioned this earlier, needs to be clear about the facility identifiers where those ECs are being approved. Again, because that's going to drive FDA's assessment of the pharmaceutical quality system, which is really looking at which facilities will be implemented, but also depending on the level of flexibility proposed, that will tailor the depth of assessment of the pharmaceutical quality system. So where there is flexibility in the established conditions proposed or lower reporting categories than we normally expect, our assessors look more into those ICHQ-10 principles, change management, effectiveness, etc., to see if the support is there to maintain ECs post-approval.
In large, our interactions with applicants have been fairly positive during the implementation of ICHQ 12 and reviewing proposals for established conditions and reporting categories, etc., in applications. Applicants have been fairly responsive in providing either additional clarity in the product lifecycle management document. So, for example, specifying the reporting categories, concatenating the PLCM by the facilities where established conditions will be implemented, as well as providing additional information to justify the established conditions or the reporting categories. Again, as I talked about earlier, not talking about changing the way an applicant goes about criticality assessment or risk assessment, but really providing the demonstration or providing the approach and the understanding for our assessors to get context around how those proposals are made. So again, providing that information when requested, as well as in certain cases the need to revise established conditions or reporting categories based on a review and assessment of the information provided. In some cases, I'll call it a handful, less than 5. Some applicants were unable to provide that requested clarification on time. These reviews are happening, in conjunction with user fee agreement timelines. And in some cases where we, have a 4-month clock, for example, on a prior approval supplement, the information is not possible to provide in that particular amount of time, especially if an applicant was not as ready as they needed to be in order to submit that supplement. Rather than head towards a CR, the proposals for established conditions were withdrawn from the application. That does not prevent the applicant from coming back again in a second supplement for another try, perhaps when they're more ready. And happy to report that we've been fairly successful when it comes to reviewing and approving established conditions, especially working with information the applicants provided and having to work through the expectations of what needs to be in these submissions. To date, we've only had to deny approval for 1 application, more so due to pharmaceutical quality system concerns. By and large, the scientific justification and presentation of information in the applications has been fairly good, and we continue to see more proposals come through.
And expand it to more application types and more stages in the product lifecycle. We are so supportive of Q12 and its benefits to pharmaceutical product quality management and the life cycle, for example, in being more agile and making changes to avert shortages or respond to shortages or increases in demand, that we have applied Q12 principles during the pandemic, for example, with container closure system changes. We continue to address common misperceptions and questions by engaging with the industry and other regulatory partners. And we've been supporting global implementation of the tools, for example, PACMPs, in various forums. We continue to support the ICHQ-12 implementation working group. The ICMARA pilots had a big focus on PACMPs and the approach to risk assessment. And we continue to share our experience with other regulators to help lower the global activation energy when it comes to the adoption of Q12. And not to mention our linkage of Q12 to other related ICH guidance documents, for example, F4Q and Revision 2, but also looking ahead into ICH Q14, where we talk about analytical methods, and you can even see the DNA in ICH Q13 when it comes to continuous manufacturing. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. A huge thanks to the ICH Q12 teams across the world, whether it's the expert working group or the implementation working group. Huge thanks to the FDA, ICH Q12, EWG and IWG teams, some key members here, But you can see on the third bullet there, the network is much, much broader than that. When it comes to our support teams, our ECCC teams, and our Q12 assessment and implementation teams, the thanks cannot be repeated enough. With that, I'm going to wrap up, and happy to engage with you further. Thank you very much.